So we'll kick it off. So great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out.
Absolutely nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for having me. I love this
Absolutely.
stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. So let's begin our journey into your work by asking you this. 5 years ago, this pandemic happened, and it changed so much for writers, for readers, for everything that we were doing. How did you get through that 2020 era, and how has it influenced the way that you do things in 2025?
Great question. Actually, I I have a master's in clinical psychology, worked as a social worker right out of grad school. Then that wasn't great for me. I moved to the healthcare tech sector when my husband and I moved out here from the Midwest. And I worked for 2 decades in healthcare technology. And then during the pandemic, I got laid off like so many people. But I was at a crossroads. I was ready to go. My kids were teens, middle school. I had parlayed my experience into a part-time job at a major tech company, which is almost unheard of. I was over 40, a woman working part-time from home. Like if I didn't have a target on my back,
Yeah.
it would have been a miracle. So it was fine for me to get laid off, and my husband and I talked, and someone with our kids at middle school and high school, we really needed someone to stay home. And my husband's job puts a roof over all of our heads, and so we decided that he would stay working, I would stay home. And I said, well, I can't do nothing. I will helicopter these children into the ground if I don't have something to distract me. And my husband said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to read romance novels all day. And he said, well, you're smart, you can write, why don't you write one? And so I did. And I got my start largely because of the pandemic and needing something to sort of keep me distracted. In the bigger picture, the pandemic, in writing and in experience, people sort of veered towards dystopian. They really wanted to like lean into this world is ending in a phenomenal way or
Yeah.
in a spectacularly weird way. And then they also then many people flipped to the other side. They wanted promises that everything was going to be okay. And romance novels, the one shining factor that you cannot veer from in a romance novel is it has to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
So uh, people knew if they read a romance novel, it was going to end up, everything was going to end up okay. And so romance has gone through several stages of exploding, but it really exploded with readers and with writers. There was
Yeah.
a lot of people in the same boat as I that they found themselves laid off or with a lot of free time at home. They couldn't go out and do the things they normally do. So they decided to start writing. So the genre exploded in a couple of different ways. And
Sure.
so that's impactful in what I write and how I market my books. It's a flooded market. And some of the work is not great because anybody can publish a book. Anybody can publish a book. So you
Yeah.
have it. It's an interesting landscape. So I'm doing this. I really needed to find why I want to write romance novels for me. Why is it? Why am I passionate about it? And it comes down to the sex positivity component, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But that's really
Absolutely.
the impact of the pandemic. It was the impetus for me to make this change to something I'm passionate about.
So speaking of the change, if I was to get a handle on your career, what you're doing now and what you've done before, I'm going to put you in front of 12-year-olds at career day, and one of the kids is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you encapsulate that to them?
12-year-olds, my language, I'd have to.
Uh-oh. That's right.
um that's a tricky one. I write stories about people who fall in love, and I try to make them as realistic as possible in still a fun and fantasy way, and everybody ends up in love in the end. And I think the world needs more love stories
Yeah.
and happy endings, and so that's what I do. I help to give the world more happy endings.
What did you want to be at 12 years old? What was your dream gig?
Well, I wanted to be an actress,
Okay.
but yeah, I wanted to be an actress. I thought I wanted to be famous. I actually grew up in Nashville,
Okay.
which out actually a small town right outside of Nashville. And it's Nashville's an interesting place to grow up
Yeah.
if you want to do something in the entertainment industry, because and I have a fairly decent voice. I can sing, and so people were like, you should be a singer, you want to be an actress, you want to be famous. And you I say to several people, you can swing a stick in that town, or you can't swing a stick in that town without hitting someone who sings better than you,
Yeah.
plays more instruments than you, is thinner than you, and is willing to work harder than you and sacrifice more than you for a career. It's an interesting place. Talent oozes from every pore there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was good or bad for me, like facing the reality of the competition that's out there in the entertainment industry. I was not prepared for. And honestly, I would not have thrived in that space. I was not meant to be an actress at all. I'm a terrible actor.
Yeah.
I'm a terrible liar. I'm not good at any of that. But what I wanted, what I realized when I got to college is, and this continues today, I'm super interested in people and what makes them tick and what makes them do the things that they do. And that's something that actors need to know. That's something that writers need to know. That's something that psychologists need to know, and social workers and counselors. And so that's sort of what drew me to psychology, that interest in people and what makes them tick. And that's really the thread. It wasn't necessarily that I wanted to be an actress, that I wanted to live that life of hard work and struggle, and that I was not cut out for that. I don't think in that way. What was really interesting to me is diving into people and what they do, and why they do it.
What was the first romance novel that you read that blew you away?
Well, I read lots of romance novels for a long time. The first romance novel that I can say blew me away was much more recently. I was probably 2018 or so. I read Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. And Kennedy Ryan is she's a Black woman author, very talented, getting a lot of attention and press and success right now, and good for her. And it has been for years. It's not like she's a bright and shining moment just right now. She's been successful consistently. But her book, what what I think really sparked in me about that book is it's about a woman who's in a abusive relationship. And about the first half of the book, she is still with her abuser. And she falls in love with her abuser is a professional basketball player. She falls in love with a member of another person on his team. And there's a lot of discussion about him wanting to protect her, but yet she's married to the man who is abusing her. And obviously it's a love story. Things happen, they get together, it all ends up good. But what I found interesting, she does get away from her ex-husband. He gets his due, which is, romance is that's what we do in romance. But she gave an interview or a talk after about that book, and she said, she interviewed a lot of women about living in domestic violence situations, and she said not one woman experienced all the things that my character experienced, but everything that happened to my character happened to a real woman. And that I still get chills thinking about that moment where I knew academically about domestic violence, but I had never experienced it so viscerally as when I was reading that book. And then to know that some of the things that happened to that character actually happened to a woman, and to sort of feel it, like I knew that those things could happen, that they were bad. Um, and you know, for sexual assault at gunpoint by your spouse, someone who has you you've pledged your life to, your love to, your heart to, then to have that person sexually assault you at gunpoint
Yeah.
has got to be a mind scramble that I can't fathom. So things like that, and it really made me think. And I was like, romance novels, everybody thinks, well, some people think romance novels are just, Fabio covers and bodice ripping and, damsel in distress stuff. But they have a huge audience. They get to people, particularly with e-readers. Romance novels get to readers that don't other places don't go,
Yeah.
and maybe there's a woman out there who read that book and realized what she was going through was not okay.
Yeah.
And that's powerful. That
Hmm.
is so powerful. So that's really what blew me away. And I said, I kind of at that moment thought romance novels are more than just intimacy and sex and happy ending and everything, ends up okay. And the alpha that comes in and beats up my big bad wolf. That's all wonderful. Those things are great. And we can talk about the reasons why those things are great, but it's more than that.
Yeah.
And that was really powerful for me.
Do you think men, because men tend to be like, oh, romance novels, it's something that is not ever going to come into my bubble. Do you think men would be better served if they would just read a few?
Of course.
I mean,
Of course.
to understand women, because I in my reading that I do a lot of audiobooks. I love female authors because they open up this portal to things that men just don't understand. There's all these misperceptions of what we think the
Right.
female psyche is actually going through. But when you
Right.
really read and get in there and get a good author, just like with a romance novel, you could learn all kinds of things.
I say a couple things that I say to people sometimes when they say, well, there's no manual about how to love a woman. And I was like, yeah, there's about 1 billion of them out there.
Uh-huh.
They're called romance novels, you know, but you have to read it with a bit of, I don't want to say smartness, but you need to read between the lines a little bit with a romance novel.
Hmm.
Romance novels typically have tropes, so typical things that they're about. And we find that readers gravitate towards a particular trope, like, enemies to lovers, or friends to lovers, or he falls first, or grumpy sunshine. Um, BDSM and dominance is a big thing in some sections of romance. And people think that it's about BDSM. And like 50 Shades of Grey was not about BDSM.
Right.
The people in the BDSM community will tell you that is not what it's like. That's not how it works. Um, what 50 Shades of Grey did was it leaned into three or four very popular fantasies that women have. One being someone's obsession. Someone just, they love me, they want me, they're so sexually attracted to me that they can't control themselves.
Yep.
That's not safe in real life, but that's safe in a romance
Yep.
novel. And someone to come in and take away all my struggles and my problems and solve all my problems for me. That seems kind of nice in a short, Ollie, he did it over the weekend. He didn't overtake her
Yeah.
life completely in the beginning. It was just on the weekend, right?
Yep.
That as a mom, when I read that book when my kids were in elementary school, that was not an unappealing situation for
Uh-huh.
me when I was like, this might be kind of cool.
Yeah.
And somebody who makes all my decisions for me. I
Mhm.
can't make a wrong decision if someone else is making all my decisions for me, which I don't want that in real life. Obviously, I want to vote. I want to have agency and power over myself. But the idea that, in a fantasy world, I wouldn't have to have the responsibility of possibly screwing up, that's appealing in a little bit of a way. So what that tells me, what romance novels can tell us. So, say I gravitate towards a romance novel where the hero is obsessed with the heroine. That's not safe in real life. That's stalker. That's danger. I would never want that from a stranger in real life. But in a romance novel, I can experience that
Yeah.
excitement and those feelings in a safe way. And then I can say to my safe partner, hey, I kind of like this idea. I write dual POV books. So I encourage couples to read my book, like read them together and then like talk about what you think is what turns you on
Yep.
about these characters. And then you can have insight into what your partner fantasizes about. And then can you find a safe way to experience that fantasy? Maybe I want my partner to, call me from work and tell me he can't stop thinking about that outfit I wore last weekend and he wants me to wear it again. And he can't work. All he can do is just thinking about me and my body. And so then he goes back to work. Like he goes back to work. He doesn't really have to, but he's calling me and telling me that this is happening. Right.
Yep.
And then maybe he says, I don't think I'm going to be able to keep my hands off you when I get home. So I meet him at the door, and he tells me, oh, if you're open to it, wear that dress again. So I wear the dress. I greet him at the door. He rushes in, throws me on the entry hall floor and makes love to me right there, because he's so obsessed with me. That's a safe experience of something that is a sexual fantasy. So having, I encourage men to read romance novels, but to also understand that the action is not actually what they need to be paying
Right.
attention to. Pay attention to what's attractive, what's the not just the behavior, but what that behavior represents.
Yeah.
And I think they're fun.
Yeah.
They're also, like I said, I encourage couples to read them together and talk about what they like, because it's easier for me to say to my partner, I really like it when he does this to her. I really don't like it when he did this to her. And then that's easier than for me to say to my partner, particularly if my partner is a man growing up in Western culture, for me to say to him, I like it when you do this. I don't like it when you do this. That can feel like criticism. That can feel like shame. Men are supposed to know everything about sex, and women are not really supposed to know what they like and what they don't like. And so some men can be intimidated by a woman who says, this is what I want. This is what I don't want. They can feel judged. That can impact their confidence, right? So if I say, I really like it, this, I don't like this about this character, that's a safer conversation for him. So I have, for so many reasons, I
Yeah.
encourage men to read romance novels, and
Yeah.
they're fun,
Yeah.
and they can turn you on.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't want to be turned on?
That's
So
it. Right. Exactly. So at the end of the day, who's been that inspiration, that heroic force in your life that's allowed you to live this dream, to write and to make these stories that are moving and helping people?
right. Well, I mean, obviously my partner, my husband,
Yeah.
he makes this possible because he when I decided to stay home, he said, if we can't live on what I make, then we're doing it wrong. We're not swimming in it and swimming in money or anything like that, but I don't have to work. And that's a gift. We can
Yeah.
still live in our house and put our kids through college and have food on the table and without me bringing in money. And that's okay. And he's very supportive about investing in this. He believes in what I'm doing. Um, he is actually the first person. He sort of um, came into this space with me when I went, let's see, I'm about 5 or 6 years postmenopausal. Going through menopause for me was really challenging. There's not a lot of information about what happens to our bodies and how we respond to that. And I had a lot of struggles: depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, a lot of things that were really scary. I knew what was happening because of my background as far as like my mental state, but it was a really challenging time. And part of that time was sexual intimacy with my partner. I was not interested. And um we didn't really understand what was going on. I He felt rejected. It's not that it wasn't about him, it was about me. And so my husband is a scientist, and what does a scientist do when they're faced with a problem? Research.
Yeah.
So he went off and went off and did all this research, and some of these books are books that he read first and said, hey, I think that you should read these, let's talk about it. And he finds a lot of sex positive writing, and he found research about how hormone levels change, and it impacts our sex drive, and things that we can do, and different ways to approach sex and intimacy together as we age. And that made all the difference. I saw a Western doctor and a naturopath, and I got on the medication I needed to get on, and I am postmenopausal now, and using very successful with hormone replacement therapy. um, so that was definitely part of the cocktail of healing, but also it was his openness to letting our sex life grow and change from when we were in our 20s, and him not taking that as a negative, but like, this is something that we're going to grow into together and change together. And I recognize how lucky I am to be married to a man who is willing to do that and okay to do that, and doesn't feel threatened by the idea that, okay, well, the way that we've been intimate in the past, it's not working for her anymore. What can we do differently? Because and some women I talk to, they're like, oh, your husband, he sounds so great. I'm like, listen, he's great, but let's he wanted to have sex with me.
Yeah.
He
Right.
was going to figure out how to make that happen.
There was a prize at the end.
There's a prize at the end. He was not doing it for, purely selfless reasons. So,
Right. It wasn't let's feed all of the African children at midnight commercial. This is
no,
There was something else going on.
right.
So my question, you mentioned, being 20 years old and being young, and the thing that I keep thinking about as we're talking about this is that, you know, when you're young, you don't know what you're doing. Women don't know what they're supposed to do, which is why there's so many things that become fake orgasmic and all of that. Have you found that as you go through all of these obstacles and these biological tsunamis in our lives, that you hit that point in your life where it's better than it ever could have been when you were younger?
Yes. Yes. Part of it is there's a book called Magnificent Sex by Peggy Klein-Platz, which I recommend to folks. It's a great book about what she did. She did a deep dive qualitative study with a smaller group of people who self-reported having magnificent sex. And so she wanted to know, like, what is consistent about these couples. And they were all older, long compatible, either married or in a long-term relationship. Um, and they talked about why the sex was so good. And it wasn't, they were, because a lot of them were older, it wasn't the up against the wall, he takes me in a second and I, orgasm, three pumps and I orgasm kind of situation. It wasn't though. It was the connection. It was the vulnerability with both partners and that willingness to say, this is what I like, do more of this, or can we try this? And knowing that if I wanted to try something that I would and it didn't work, my partner would not judge me or it wouldn't be embarrassing. We would
Yeah.
both have a laugh about it and move on. But it was that intimacy connection. So, when we're younger, I think we come into sex with all of this noise from outside. Men are supposed to know where the clitoris is and how to make it happy.
Yeah.
And women are kind of not really supposed to know. Like, female masturbation is not something that we joke about or talk about. It's not in some circles okay, which is in my mind kind of ridiculous
Yeah.
because how else are we supposed to know what feels good to us? Because all of our bodies are different.
Hmm.
And some women like one thing, some women like another thing. Um, the clitoris is like an iceberg. The part that you can see is the smallest, just the tip part. It goes deeper, it wraps around the opening of the vagina. It can go up the legs, the curl I might not pronounce that right, which is the legs of it underneath. They go up the side, or can go up and around the vagina. That's sort of the source of the G spot. It's actually the same tissue that's connected. So there's so much
Yeah.
underneath the surface. And if women don't know about their bodies and then how to feel that, um, how can we tell our partner what we
Yeah.
like? How can our partner figure out what we like? And then we have women also have to deal sort of with that cultural shame. Like, it's not okay for us to masturbate. The idea of oral sex on a woman, some men are very vocal about not liking it. And then some men are very vocal about it smelling bad or tasting bad, and this is a part of our bodies that culture has told us is dirty and
Hmm.
wrong and sinful. And then we have these voices in our heads that tell us they that it's not good. It's not, men don't like it. It is a burden to have to do this. That can really damage someone.
Hmm.
And women, 60 to 70% of women don't orgasm from penetration,
Wow.
certainly from penetration alone. The clitoris needs stimulation or other areas need stimulation. A lot of women report having orgasms with oral much more than with penetration. So, to have all this noise,
Yeah.
you come into this space. It's a huge maturation process to
Yeah.
get to a point sexually. It's a sexual growth arc. All of my books have a character growth arc and they all have a sexual growth arc where
Yeah.
they start one place and then they go to a different place in their knowledge of their bodies, their knowledge of and their acceptance of their bodies and what feels good.
So if you were to walk into another room in your house and run into like the 16-year-old version of you and explain what you're doing with your life, would that version of you be surprised? Would she be happy? What would be the reaction of your younger self to the life you've lived and where you're at?
Right. She would be very surprised. I grew up again in the southeastern United States in the 80s. I was a teen in the 80s, so I predated purity culture in the church, in the Christian church, evangelical church. Um, but all those concepts were still there. My
Yeah.
body was wrong. My body was dirty. My body was a temptation. If sex happened, it would be my fault because I wasn't supposed to like sex. boys were supposed to like sex, girls were not supposed to like sex. So if it happened, he couldn't he couldn't control it, but I could. And
Right.
so it would be my fault. I was the temptress, I was the dirty one. Um, so if I think she would, number one, be super surprised. Um, I'd like to think that she would be happy to know that she would eventually get to a place where she was happy with her body and had a much more healthy attitude towards sex herself, and then confidence to go out and tell the world.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, who I was as a 16-year-old is part of why I do this. I want to go back and talk to the 16-year-olds and say, this isn't right. This
Yeah.
isn't real. This isn't true. There's a whole other world out there that you can explore. Purity culture was okay for some people, but the majority of people we're finding, therapists are finding it for the majority of people, it wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And it had a harmful effect. I don't want to say that it was everybody. It wasn't everybody. Some people it was great for, but the majority of people it wasn't. And so that's when I say, like, I want to go back and tell that 16-year-old me, this isn't what you're hearing. These messages, they're not about you. They are about control and power in a culture that is outside of you.
Yeah.
So, you know, hang in there.
Yep.
It gets better.
Yeah. For sure.
As Dan Savage is a famous podcaster out here from
Yeah.
the Pacific Northwest, and I think he is famous for saying it gets better.
Uh-huh.
So,
Certainly does. So, of everything that you've done, everything you've accomplished, everything you've evolved to at this point, what are you the proudest of?
oh gosh, that's hard to say. I think I'm the proudest of, hmm, so I don't know if proud's the right word. So my husband is um he's descended, he's like 100% German. He's stoic, he's a scientist, he's a mentor, he works in tech, he's very serious. And it's funny when people find out what I do now, they're sort of like, how does
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
work? Like,
Yeah.
like that really, that's what your wife does? So while I'm proud might not be the right word, I'm super entertained when people sort of put together the two of us. And I'm proud of the fact that we can both be so different and still be so different to the outer world, yet we're
Yeah.
very similar on the inside. We're
Yeah.
we're built in a lot of the same ways. We have a lot of the same passions and values. And um, so I think I'm most proud of that.
So, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, all of your readers, everyone that you work with in the publishing industry, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Such hard questions that no one has ever asked me before. Um, oh, my perception of me is flawed, but trying really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, flawed, but trying really hard to be better, to do better, to make the right choices, and scared that I won't make the right choices. So, but brave. I mean, there's a reason my pen name is Braver.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to be braver if I'm
Yeah.
going to do this, and that's that's what I'm trying to be.
So if anybody wants to pick up your wonderful books, they want to reach out, they want to learn more, anything that's going on in your world, where do they go?
Start with my website, ChristinaBraver.com. That's the best place to get information about me. And you can email me directly at author@ChristinaBraver.com. And I love to talk to readers. I especially love I get readers who reach out to me to say, thank you for putting this in your book. Thank you. My newsletter, I put out a monthly newsletter, and I have a sex positivity spotlight in that every month, where I talk about something that I've read about, and I get responses. Readers come back and say, thanks for saying orgasm's not the only way to successfully end an intimate time.
Yeah.
Because that's something people struggle with.
Yeah.
Or, thank you for saying that I deserve pleasure, because I've never really thought, or I never really realized how I wasn't giving myself permission to enjoy things in life, not just sex, but things in life. So, yeah, I love to hear from readers. So feel free to email me. And yeah, but my website, I have a resources tab on my website that I list a lot of the books that I have read, certainly the books that I recommend on um, sexuality and sex positivity, and all. I have websites there that I recommend, other sex focused podcasts that I recommend people, a lot of the resources that I'm accessing so that I can write those steamy scenes
Yeah.
in an authentic, positive way. So I recommend a lot of resources there, and I encourage people to go there. And I'm just starting a blog, getting that up and running in the next couple of months, with all of my past sex positivity spotlights, and just some, it's sort of an outlet for me to write all of these sex positive things that I want to say to the world. So yeah, so that's a great place to start.
Excellent. So I will make sure to put all that in the show notes. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. It's
Thank
been
you.
wonderful. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.